It is always a joy to be with you. It's so wonderful to be on the journey of life with each and every one of you, awakening to our spiritual essence, our core, our divinity, especially when we are challenged with the battlefield of the mind. So the title of my talk is Let's Tune into the God Power Within and Conquer the Battlefield of the Mind. Sometimes as New Thought Truth students, we are very, very focused on being positive. So terms like battlefield or war can seem like the complete opposite of what we value. But the Bible, the sacred text of Judeo-Christianity, has many lessons for us. I always say this because if there are visitors who are with us as a New Thought congregation, a New Thought movement, we interpret the Bible metaphysically and esoterically. Adam and Eve are the united soul, the inner feminine and masculine, born of the presence that goes through and on a journey to awakening, to meeting with the I am presence, the Christ consciousness, onto awakening. So every person, every situation is a metaphor for life. And today I would love to share with you the beautiful esoteric and metaphysical symbolism in the story of Samson and Delilah. So let me read. I'm going to read from Judges chapter 16, Samson and Delilah. One day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, Samson is here. So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, at dawn, we will kill him. But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night, and then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city of the gate, together with 2 posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them on his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of the great strength he has and how we can overcome him so we may lay him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver, which was the equivalent of about $5,000 in this day, millions of dollars for that time. So Delilah said to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength, my lover, and how can you be tied up and subdued? Samson answered her, if anyone ties me up with 7 flesh bowstrings that have not dried, I will become weaker, as weak as any other man. Then the ruler of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him up while he was sleeping. With the men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped up the bowstrings as easily as a piece of thread snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then sometime later, Delilah said to Samson, Samson, you've made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come on, my love. Tell me how you can be tied. Tell me how you can be weakened. He said again, if anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man. So Delilah took up new ropes and tied him down. And then, with the Philistine military hidden in the room and outside, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the ropes off his arms as though they were threads. Some time again, Delilah then said to Samson, all this time you've been making a fool of me and lying to me. Please tell me the secret of your strength. He replied, if you weave 7 braids of my hair into the fabric loom and tighten them with a pin, then I will become as weak as any other man. So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his hair and wove them into the fabric and tightened them with a pin. Again she said to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon us. He woke from his sleep and pulled up the pins, the loom, and the fabric. His strength was still there. Then she said to him, how can you say you love me if you don't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you've made a fool of me and told me and have not told me the secret of your great strength. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day, night after night, until he was sick of death with it. Oh, so he said, woman, I will tell you everything. No razor has ever been used on my head because I've been a Nazarite, dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, my strength will leave me, and I will become as weak as any other man. When Delilah saw that he told her everything, she sent word to the ruler of the Philistines, come back once more. He's told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him asleep on her lap with a drink, she called to someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He woke from his sleep and thought, I will go out before, shake myself free and kill these men. But he had not known that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gorged out his eyes, took him down to Gaza, binding him in bronze shackled. They set him on a grinding grain and in prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. And so it is. So what is this puzzling sacred tale trying to tell us? Well, many people, myself included, grew up being very familiar with the story of Samson, the strongest man who ever lived. The Bible states that he single-handedly killed 1,000 men with a jawbone from a dead animal. There is no doubt about it. He was invincible because the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. But I want you to understand, my beloveds, that this man's life doesn't belong to a literal character in the Jewish Bible or in Jewish history. It belongs to you. It is an esoteric metaphor. Samson is you and I. So in order to understand what we mean, what this story means, we're going to have to look at it esoterically and metaphysically. In fact, if we were to take it literally, we would lose the spiritual power that is hidden in this metaphorical tale. So I believe that this story comes alive when we as truth students learn to take these symbols and internalize them and use them in our lives. So we must admit there are certain aspects of this story that seem far-fetched, absurd, and ridiculous, just like something that came out of a Marvel comic book or a Marvel movie. Samson's superhuman strength came from his unshaven hair. Delilah, the infamous prostitute, finally wrestles this information from Samson so she can betray him to the Philistines. I quote here from the Bible again. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day, week after week, until he was sick of death to it. He told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head because I am a Nazarite, dedicated to God from my womb. If my head is shaved, my strength will leave me, and I will become as weak as any other man. Who would have thought that God would store someone's physical strength in their hair? Interesting. Of equal interest is how stupid Samson appears to be. Delilah had betrayed him 3 times before. And so silly of him, he had lied about his source of strength, so she prodded and prodded, but on the 4th time, Samson gives in and tells Delilah that by cutting his hair, she can render him weak as any other man. So we ask ourselves, what was he thinking or not thinking? But that's not all. The story becomes even odder when we understand that Samson was a chosen man of God for the mission of judging Israel and is chasing after and sleeping with harlots. He slept with the harlot in Gaza. He is attracted and addicted to the senses. So what does the story have to do with you and me? From a metaphysical point of view, Samson wasn't really thinking when he gave in to Delilah. The same thing happens with us when we give in to the Delilahs of our life. This is not about morality, my beloveds. This is about the power of God within us. In ancient Greece, long hair was a symbol of wealth, prosperity, and power in antiquity. So can we find a correlation with Samson? Sort of. But Samson's power was not meant to be spiritual. Samson's power was not meant to be physical. It was meant to be spiritual. The long hair worn by Samson represents spiritual power, the God power within us that grows from the mind of a person who is operating from an elevated consciousness. In other words, Samson's hair was and equal to spiritual power, spiritual force, God power within, the God power growing from the higher mind, a mind that is stayed on God, a mind that is thinking power thoughts, a mind that is thinking positive thoughts, like my friend's sister who just passed away. She is abiding in the mind of God, although her sister was brutally murdered. So Delilah represents emotions. The act of cutting Samson's hair is symbolic of our emotions cutting us off from the wisdom and the power of the higher mind in our lives. We all know that emotions can play a strong role in our decision-making process. So we are not meant to be ruled by our emotions. We are meant to be ruled by spirit, by God power within, by source, by the higher mind, by our higher consciousness. choice. This is why Samson was not thinking in the literary story. His emotions had taken over. Think about how many times you have reacted to situations in your life. I've reacted to situations in my life instead of making a conscious, high-minded, God-centered choice. I bet you've done it recently. I've done it recently. When I become overwhelmed with fear about the future, whether or not I can finish my studies because do I have the ability, do I have the time? When I allow my negative thinking to overpower me. Last Monday, my beloveds, I missed our meeting because I was in the throes of completing my 20-page paper for my class. I didn't think I could do it, and it didn't matter. I sat down. I'd been working on it for several weeks, and I had to finish it. It was due. So I said a affirmative prayer, and I began, and I worked through all the early hours of the morning. It was done by 7 a.m. on Tuesday. And then my professor sent me an email, and I had gotten a 94. There was a moment in all of it where I thought, I can't do this. I'm not feeling inspired, but I tuned into the God power within me, aligning with higher consciousness instead of my negative emotions of fear. So in this story, we are being shown that Samson allowed his emotions, his lusts, his addictions, his fears to get in the way of his divine power. That is what Delilah represents. Overwhelming emotions of fear, addiction, whatever it might be. Some of us are addicted to catastrophizing. And the Philistine army represents all those negative thoughts, the army of thoughts, the battle in our consciousness, the battle of our minds. So the Philistines represent the thoughts that become our enemies. You've heard the expression, the battle between the ears or the battle in your mind. When we react from emotions, our thoughts can become the greatest enemy we could have. Thoughts and emotions have a synergetic relationships, and they can spiral out of control and send us into the whirlwind of a stressful life or the dark night of the soul. I know for me in the past, you guys know, I suffered from depression because I could not win the battle of my mind. I was constantly engaged in a sea, in a battlefield of negative thinking until I began to use our spiritual technology of affirmative prayer, of study, of meditation. Then the Philistines gorged his eyes out and took him to Gaza, and they put him in bronze shackles, imprisoning Samson. Our thoughts and emotions can truly blind us and can shackle us, can hold us in a prison. So instead of really being able to create as spiritual beings from conscious to thought, it becomes a prison. We are ruled by these aspects of ego. We are in trouble. Only by tapping into our higher minds, my beloved, into our inner God power, intuition, can we truly be guided out of enslaved positions, out of imprisonment, just as Samson was. He was shackled in prison and blinded, so he couldn't see anything. This is what happens to us when we are ruled by our lower nature. Life becomes an repeating pattern of failure. as if we are going round and round and round on the same mountain until we learn to climb to a different perspective. And that different perspective is a spiritual one. We must climb higher in consciousness. But there is always hope for Samson, as there is always hope for us. While Samson was in the midst of his trial, and my beloveds, many of us are going through trials by fire. His hair grew black. And the story goes that Samson prayed and asked for the Lord to give him his strength back one more time. And because his hair grew long again, we are to understand that Samson was again operating from the higher mind, from higher consciousness, from the God power within. And at the end of the story, we have the greatest illustration. Samson is taken by one of the slaves to a feast that the Philistines are having because they are thrilled that they have conquered him. Your negative thoughts are thrilled. The ego is thrilled that it has conquered the God mind, the God power, the I am presence within you. So Samson stands up and puts his great arms against two pillars and sacrifices himself by pushing these pillars, killing himself and all the Philistines. And what is the meaning of this powerful ending? The temple or the banquet hall represents our mind. And the two pillars represent two aspects of us, the higher nature and the lower nature of the mind, the divine feminine or the inner feminine, the emotions, the feelings, and the negative thoughts. Samson pushes them down and kills himself and the Philistines. At last, Samson has found the balance between the two natures, the God within and the thoughts, and kills the ego. So Samson prayed, as we need to pray, Lord God, remember me, strengthen me once again, give me the power to overcome the battle of the mind. So, my beloveds, this knowledge is so important for us today. We are told in this world that we are not powerful, and yet there is a God power within us. I say yes, let's conquer the battle of our mind, like Samson did, by overcoming the petty thoughts, the attachment to our emotions, to our Delilahs, the attachment to our negative thinking, the Philistine army, once again to be with God, once again to tune in to our higher mind and the I am presence. With God, we can overcome all battles. With the God power within, we can be triumphant. And so it is. Amen.